Okay, so starting with today's presentation, right? Today we're going to talk about PEDAC for writing test cases. So what exactly is PEDAC? We did have a presentation and a session by Zenzi in the previous quality time in November, where she explained in detail about PEDAC and how we could use PEDAC for answering our automation test cases or automation script or coding interview questions, right? So I'm just taking that topic and then kind of merging it with how we can use it for writing test cases. So that's what I'll be talking about today. So before we start, I'll just give like a quick review of PEDAC, just in case if someone has missed that session. You can go and look at the recording. We should have it in the YouTube channel. And the presentation link is available in the Slack channel, so you could go and refer back to that. But let me give like a quick review of what PEDAC is, right? So PEDAC is an approach where you use mainly for writing your code. It could be during development or developing your automation scripts, right? So what does it consist of? So the first point in PEDAC, which is stands for problem, right? So you have to process the problem, understand the problem in hand. What are you trying to solve? So that is the first step. And you could kind of consider the example data structure and algorithm under processing the problem itself. So first you understand what you're trying to solve, then you move on to examples where you come up with high-level test cases. Or if you're coding, you could come up with all your test scenarios that you would be using to test your code, right? And once you know your test cases, then you know your input, you know your output. So based on that, you move to data structure, where you decide what kind of data you want to use as your input or what data structure you need. Do you need any database connection? Those kind of things. And once you've decided that, so now you understand the problem, you have your test cases, you have your data type decided, you can write an algorithm. So before writing any code, you usually have the steps that you write so that it's clear that, okay, I need to do this, 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 followed by this. So you write your algorithm. And once you have that, you have like the bone of your whole program. So then you can start writing your code. And what this does is it makes the whole process much simpler of coding and kind of reduces the gaps in your coding, right? So that's a quick overview of PEDAC. The second part of our topic is that what we are talking about is test cases, right? So what is a test case? So we all probably have worked on test cases, written some kind of test case, or have an understanding of test case. So just giving a quick overview of test cases. It's basically a set of actions, right, that you're using to perform or to verify the functionality that you're testing, to make sure that the steps kind of describe that the functionality or the product that you're testing is developed as expected, right? So that's what test cases are. So it consists of precondition, test data, test steps, expected results. Test steps and expected results sometimes are like just in a single line, or you have step-by-step, those kind of things. So that's what test case is. So now coming to today's topic, how exactly are we going to use PEDAC for writing test cases, right? Because we know that PEDAC is mainly used for coding purpose or dev work, but how does it come in play when writing test cases? So we're going to talk about that today. So we're first going to start with problem, right? So any test case you're writing is basically to understand a product, a feature. You're basically trying to resolve a problem, right? So the first step in understanding your problem is knowing your requirements. What is the source of your requirements? If you're working in a larger company, usually they have like a formal written requirement spec, functional specs. But in smaller companies, it's usually, like somebody posted something in a Slack or during some conversation. And then that takes the shape of a product or a feature enhancement. So do you have a proper source of requirement? If not, then probably try to get to talking to the product team, or if you don't have access to the product team, the business analyst team, like go talk to people, try to understand the requirement, right? If you have a requirement document, then probably go through it and then make a note of all the questions that you have so that you have a clear understanding of the requirement. So that's the first step. And then the second thing is, so the first one is understanding your source of requirement and then going through it. Sometimes you have design documents that are pretty helpful in understanding what exactly the product team is viewing, has a vision as, right? Because design documents kind of give wireframe. So check if there are any design documents. The second point under the problem would be for you to understand who's going to run the test case that you're going to write. Are you going to run it? Is it a remote team or an external team that's going to run it? Or are you writing those test cases for automation purpose? Because these are the things that will decide what exactly goes in your test case, right? If you're going to run the test case, you could probably just write, one-liners because you're going to run it. But what you need to think is that in the future, you might not be running the test case. And in future, you might have to automate those test cases. So are your test cases written that it can be taken as is to automate it, or will they have to be simplified further, right? So understanding that part of the problem is also a necessity in the beginning itself. Then moving on under the problem again, the test case that you're going to write, is it for a new feature? Is it an existing feature that is being enhanced? So if it's an existing feature that is being enhanced, then you need to go find the test cases that already exist. And do you need to modify them? Are they no longer valid? How is that going to work? Again, if it's a modification of feature, one of the questions that you need to ask either your product team or your business analyst team or whoever is responsible for the product, right? Are they going to support, the previous version? So do you need to do version control for your test cases? Do you need to do back testing? Those kind of things will come up here. So that's where you need to start thinking about, is it a new feature? Is it an enhancement? Is it modification? What is it? And the last point under problem is you need to understand who your end users are. Like I mentioned, right? Sometimes you might be writing test cases, but you might not be testing it. So you need to write your test cases in a way that any person, any outsider who comes in can also read your test cases, understand what they're going to do, know what they're going to test and what the expected outcome is. So to have that clarity, right? So before you start writing your test case, know who your end user is. In addition to that, you also need to know who's going to use the product that is being developed, right? A lot of times, the product that is developed is for a client or a customer or those kind of things. But in certain cases, you could be working on a product that is developed for the internal team within the company, right? So knowing your end user or your target audience, you can think like them and then start writing test cases or come up with scenarios similar to what an end user would think of, right? Say, imagine you're developing a product for kids, a game, right? So if you think like yourself, like an adult, you would know that, okay, I need to do this is how it works. But if you give the same thing to a kid, the kid is not going to do things in sequence, right? They're just going to randomly click things, instead of closing a button, they're going to open something else before they close it, those kind of things. So you need to start thinking like your end user. So that is also a part of problem where you can, when you think like an end user, you come up with questions in the requirements like end user. So that'll make things simpler for you. So that is talking about the problem. Moving on to the example stage. So in our actual PEDAC, where you're writing a code, right, the example stage is where you come up with test cases. But in our manual, like writing test case part, and for the manual testing or, just the writing test case, the example part would be where you start thinking about edge case scenarios, right? So you have understood the functionality, you have understood who the end user is. Now you start thinking like the end user and you start thinking about edge cases. Has the functionality document covered edge cases? Do you know what's going to happen in certain edge cases? Like one very interesting example I could say from my work experience was we were developing a mobile app for a banking customer, right? And we had to test, when a customer can get a password, a temporary password, either by, a text message or call. And the phone that we were using, it didn't have mobile connection. So we were using our personal phone to get the call and get the password. But then the end users had the mobile connection on their own phone. So when they get the call, the whole screen would reset to the initial screen. So they were in a loop. They would go to password reset, and then they would go back to the initial screen just because a call was coming in and it was resetting it. So even when we were testing it, we were not able to reproduce it, whereas actual customers were complaining about it, right? So because we didn't think of the scenario that the call was coming in on the same device as the device that the testers were using. So kind of like, here in the example, think of all the edge cases, all different scenarios, different use cases, what is supposed to happen. Ask these questions aloud. Ask these questions to your product team, to your developer team. Talk to them, arrange for grooming sessions where you talk about these scenarios so that no edge case is missed. And then again, similar to the coding part, understand your input, right? For a given input, what is the expected output? Have a clear understanding of that. So that would give you a better understanding of the functionality that you're going to be testing. Think of all the positive scenarios. Think of all the negative scenarios for a given use case. Think of all of them and make a note of them. So that would be our example thing in writing test cases. Moving on to the data, right? Then again, in the coding form where you are deciding now what data structure you need to use, in writing test cases, you need to decide, do you need any data? If you need data, who's going to create that data? Are you responsible for creating the data? Or is the dev team going to provide you data? If so, by when will the data be ready? If you're going to create the data, then you need to work on how are you going to create data, right? Are you going to manually create the data? Will you have a third-party tool to create the data? Or will you use like a script to create data? Are you going to develop that script? So you need to take in account that time as well in your testing, right? If you need to spend extra time in creating your data. So you'll have to work on that. And then if the developer or some other team is going to provide you data, then have like a set date for it, by when the data will be ready. Are you going to create data? How can you get the sample data? If you're going to create the sample data, then start working on it. So those kind of things you think about in the data. And then if you know that you're responsible for sample data, maybe start working on creating that data for your testing. So this phase is where you decide how you're going to get access to your data, how you're going to set it up, and then how you're going to use it. So once you have your data, you come to the algorithm part, right? In the algorithm part, you come up with a title for each scenario, right? A positive scenario, a negative scenario. For each high-level scenario, you split it into a positive scenario, negative scenario, or the multiple scenarios. So have a title for it. If you can give a summary or an overview of each scenario that you're going to test, right? Then have that summary ready. And then start thinking about any preconditions required for your testing purpose. Start thinking about the steps or actions that is required for your testing purpose for this particular scenario or feature. So start thinking of those things, start writing like a skeleton of your test case with a title. Have the summary, maybe not for each test case, but for a feature or like a product, right? So have a summary for it ready, so that anyone who wants to understand the product can go read your summary. They get an overview of, okay, this is what I'm going to test in this test folder, and this is what I need. So have that ready. And once you have all of these, you can move on to the code part, which here would be writing your test case, right? So now that you have everything, you have your data, you have understood the product, so you can think of any preconditions, any post conditions that you need. If you have design documents, or if it's an enhancement to an existing feature, right, then you can add screenshots in your test cases. If you have that, a test management tool which allows that. So having all these will make your test case very clear. It'll simplify your test case for you or for anyone else to use the test case, right? Because you have added all these conditions there, or all these steps. So write detailed steps, as detailed as you can. The post condition that I've added here, one thing to keep in mind is usually when you write test case, right, and you need some data, so you have used that data, and if you are adding that data to your test case or the sample data to your test case, then once you're done with the test case, make sure that your data reaches back to the initial stage that it was in. Because if you're going to reuse the test case, run it next time, you need the data in the initial state, right? If you've already done some condition, like, for example, let's take credit cards, right? And you need to disable a credit card by reporting it to fraud. So you started with an active card. That was your precondition. And then you go into the system, report it fraud, and your final verification step was verify that the card is now registered as fraud in the system, right? So next time when you come back, you can't reuse the same data because it has already been flagged as fraud. So then you would have to recreate the data. So if that is your flow, then don't attach your data in there, and then just have a precondition that user needs to create a active credit card, or link it to the test case, as your precondition would be linked to the test case where the user needs to run a test case where they create an active credit card into the system, right? But if you need to reuse the same data, then once it is flagged as fraud, you have done the verification, go back into the system, change it to active, so that if a tester comes back and starts running this test with the same data, they can use the same data and run it. So always keep that in mind. If your data is changing and you're not resetting it back, do not add that data, because then that test case needs maintenance continuously, right? So that is about PEDAC. The idea of following PEDAC for writing test cases, it kind of simplifies the process of writing test case where you have a deeper understanding of the product. So you write simplified test cases, which makes your work easier. And it also helps in catching bugs much earlier, even before you've started writing test cases, right? You can catch bugs or edge cases during the requirement phase or during the design document. You're reviewing the design document, so you can catch bugs there, because sometimes there are gaps between the product and design document. And going through it might also help developers come up with their technical specs and the test cases for their code. So it kind of helps them also to think from a QA's perspective. So that way you're reducing a lot of bug and saving a lot of time for yourself, as well as improving the quality of product. So that is about PEDAC for writing test case. The other place where you could use this approach would be during your interview process, right? When you are asked to write test cases in your interview process, a lot of times, because we're so used to writing test cases every day or as part of our job, anyone asks us, okay, can you write test case for this scenario? And then we are like, yeah, sure. And then you start giving your expected verification or test steps and expected verification, right? So what is happening there is you're missing the opportunity to show to the interviewer that you can take things in your control, try to understand and simplify the problem that you have in hand, and show them that you have the clarity of understanding in detail, right? Giving them the opportunity to understand your thought process as well, what goes into writing test cases. So before you even start answering any test case problem, start asking them questions to get a deeper understanding of what kind of test cases are they looking for, what feature are they looking for you to write test cases for. So ask them to try to get a deeper understanding of their product, and then if you have done some work already on their product and you know how the product works, before you start writing test cases, let them know what your thought process is. So let them know that this is what I'm going to write. First scenario, what I'm going to write, why I'm using this scenario as the first scenario to test, what is the test data that I'm going to use, and then start explaining your test cases. So that's where you can use this approach also. That's pretty much what I had. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them here.